Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today, I'm going to give my review of Wrestlemania 5. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is King Haku versus Hercules. I thought this was a relatively good matchup to open up Wrestlemania 5. Back and forth matchup between both King Haku and Hercules, with King Haku keeping the pace of the match. But Hercules ultimately hits a back body drop into a roll-up on Haku, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Hercules. Hats off to Hercules for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Rockers versus the Twin Towers. I thought this was a relatively good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between both the Rockers and the Twin Towers, with the Rockers keeping the pace of the match. But Akeem from the Twin Towers ends up hitting a big splash, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Twin Towers. Hats off to the Twin Towers for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ted DiBiase versus Brutus the Barber. I thought this was a relatively good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both DiBiase and Brutus the Barber, with Brutus keeping the pace of the match. But the match ultimately ends in a draw. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is the Roju Brothers versus the Bushwhackers. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both the Roju Brothers and the Bushwhackers, with the Roju Brothers keeping the pace of the match. But the Bushwhackers ultimately hit the finish, pin for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Bushwhackers. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Mr. Perfect versus the Blue Blazer. I thought this was a really good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Mr. Perfect and the Blue Blazer, with Mr. Perfect keeping the pace of the match. And Mr. Perfect ultimately hits his signature Perfect Plex on the Blue Blazer, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Mr. Perfect. Hats off to Mr. Perfect for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Demolition versus the Powers of Pain for the WWE Tag Team Championships. I thought this was a relatively good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between both teams. Demolition was keeping the pace of the match. Fuji then goes to throw Salt in the face of Smash, but missed and hit the Warlord. Demolition then hit the finish on Mr. Fuji. Pins for the 3, and your winners of the match. And still, at that time, WWE Tag Team Champions are Demolition. A couple things I'm going to say about this matchup quickly. Number one, Demolition was a fantastic tag team back in the day, as well as Powers of Pain. Mr. Fuji was also involved in this matchup. It was pretty much a handicap tag team match, 3-on-2. It was great to see Mr. Fuji in the ring as well, but hats off to Demolition for getting the win in that matchup, and at that time retaining the WWE Tag Team Championships. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Dino Bravo versus Ronnie Garvin. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Dino Bravo and Ronnie Garvin, with Dino Bravo keeping the pace of the match. And Dino Bravo ultimately hits his signature sidewalk slam on Ronnie Garvin, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Dino Bravo. Hats off to Dino Bravo for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Brainbusters versus Strikeforce. I thought this was a relatively good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both the Brainbusters and Strikeforce, with the Brainbusters keeping the pace of the match. Arn then hits a Spinebuster on Tito Santana, and then the Brainbusters end up hitting the finish, pin for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Brainbusters. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Jake the Snake Roberts versus Andre the Giant, with special guest referee Big John Studd. Again, I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Jake Roberts and Andre the Giant, with Andre keeping the pace of the match. Andre then attacks Big John Studd in the middle of the ring, which causes a disqualification, and your winner of the match is Jake the Snake Roberts. Hats off to Jake the Snake Roberts for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Hart Foundation versus Greg the Hammer Valentine and Honky Tonk Man. I thought it was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Hart Foundation keeping the pace of the match. But Bret Hart ultimately hits Honky Tonk with Jimmy Hart's megaphone, with the referee being distracted. Pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Hart Foundation. Hats off to the Hart Foundation for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Rick Rude versus Ultimate Warrior for the WWE Intercontinental Championship. I thought this was a great matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Rick Rude and Ultimate Warrior, with the Warrior keeping the pace of the match. Warrior then goes to suplex Reed back into the ring, but Bobby Heenan ends up grabbing Warrior's leg. Rude then gets the cover, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, new WWE Intercontinental Champion is Rick Rude. Hats off to Rick Rude for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Bad News Brown. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth match between both Duggan and Bad News Brown, with Duggan keeping the pace of the match. But the match ultimately ends in a double disqualification. So, again, wish we got a clear-cut winner. But unfortunately, it ended up turning into a disqualification. And honestly, a little side note here, Bad News Brown didn't get a whole lot of credit, man. I thought Bad News Brown was a great heel in professional wrestling, and I feel like not a lot of people gave him credit in professional wrestling. So, Bad News Brown was definitely one hell of a heel, in my honest opinion. And Jim Duggan, I mean, what more can you say? It's Hacksaw Jim Duggan, absolute legend in professional wrestling. But I wish this match, we ended up getting a clear-cut winner, but unfortunately it didn't, and we got a double disqualification. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Red Rooster versus Bobby Heenan. It was an okay matchup, back and forth matchup between both Heenan and the Red Rooster. Heenan ends up running into the post, and Rooster ends up getting the win in this matchup. So hats off to the Red Rooster for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WrestleMania 5. It is Macho Man Randy Savage versus Hulk Hogan for the WWE Championship. I thought this was a great matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Savage and Hogan, with Hogan keeping the pace of the match. Hogan was hawking up in the match. He ends up hitting a big boot on Savage, and he ultimately hits a signature leg drop on Savage as well, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match and new WWE Champion is Hulk Hogan. A couple of things I'm going to say about WrestleMania 5 before I get out of here, man. If I had to give WrestleMania 5 a rating between 1 out of 10, I'm going to give it a solid maybe 6 at best. I don't think WrestleMania 5 was all that, in my honest opinion. A lot of the matches were kind of, I don't know how they booked this card, but it was just all over the place. The Red Rooster Bobby Heenan match, I don't think it was necessarily needed. Obviously, the main reason why I'm giving it maybe a 6.5 at best is because the main event, Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan, a humongous storyline between those two that stemmed from Miss Elizabeth. Obviously, them being a part of the Mega Powers team. A lot of history between Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. And probably one of the best rivalries that Hulk Hogan's ever had in his career, in my honest opinion, besides maybe Ric Flair. Randy and Hogan was definitely one of the best rivalries in professional wrestling, in my honest opinion. And that carried on later on in their careers when they even got into WCW. So, the main event was awesome, absolutely awesome. But other than that, I mean, I'm going to have to give it a 6.5 at best for WrestleMania 5. But this is my review of WrestleMania 5. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classy.